Have you ever stared at something overwhelmingly complex, maybe a high-tech drone, an intricate clock, or even just the miraculous dexterity of your own hand, and felt that undeniable impulse to ask, who made that? Who designed it?
Mm.
It's a question that seems, well, hardwired into us, right?
Hmm.
For centuries, it's often led people to conclude that things this sophisticated must be the product of some conscious intelligence.
Absolutely, that intuition is powerful.
But what if the actual answer is even more, I don't know, profoundly awe-inspiring, maybe even more elegant, precisely because it isn't the work of a conscious designer at all?
That's the twist, isn't it?
Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into one of the most transformative scientific ideas, certainly of the last few centuries. We're going chapter by chapter into Richard Dawkins' seminal work, The Blind Watchmaker.
Okay.
It really is, and it directly confronts this ultimate puzzle: complex design in living organisms. Our mission today is to unpack his meticulous arguments, showing how nature, through these simple yet incredibly powerful blind forces, can produce wonders that only appear designed with elegant efficiency.
And our goal for this deep dive is really to give you a powerful new lens, a new way to view the living world. We'll explore how seemingly possible complexity, from the intricate neural networks firing in your brain to the microscopic machinery powering every single cell, how all that can arise without any conscious architect.
Right.
You'll hopefully uncover those aha moments, the ones that unlock the genius of cumulative selection. It can fundamentally transform the way you understand everything, from, say, the flight of a bird to the very structure of your own eye.
So it's about understanding biological complexity, but stripping away the mystery.
Exactly. Explained without resorting to mystery.
The enigma of apparent design setting the stage for the blind watchmaker.
Okay, so let's jump right into the heart of this puzzle that Dawkins lays out. The sheer, almost unbelievable complexity of life. He really wants us to grapple with it.
He does. He doesn't shy away from it.
Not at all. He says, take a moment to consider a human brain. It's an array of something like 10 million kiloneurons.
Which is what, 10 billion nerve cells?
10 billion individual nerve cells, yeah.
Yeah.
And many of those are intricately connected by over 1,000 electric wires to other neurons. Just picturing that web. It's mind-boggling.
It really is.
But then, go down to the molecular genetic level. Every single one of the trillion-plus cells in your body contains, he says, roughly 1,000 times as much precisely coded digital information as an early 64-kilobyte computer.
1,000 times.
It's not just a jumble of parts. It's precisely coded and elegantly efficient. It's something that, as he puts it, cries out for explanation.
Indeed, that level of complexity isn't just acknowledged. It's framed as something that insistently demands a special kind of explanation. Historically, humans naturally attribute complex, purposeful creations like watches or computers to a designer.
Right, Paley's watchmaker analogy.
Exactly. William Paley, back in the 18th century, made that famous argument: find a watch, you infer a watchmaker. The complexity of life is far greater, so divine creator. Dawkins actually shares Paley's profound reverence for the intricate beauty and apparent design in biology.
He really emphasizes that.
He does, but he argues Paley, though observant, just got the explanation wrong. The very intuition that points towards a designer is what Dawkins sets out to address head on.
And Dawkins makes this really powerful personal statement early on, doesn't he? About his commitment to scientific truth over just, winning points in an argument.
Yeah, that anecdote about the university debate is quite telling.
He remembers debating creationists, and he was genuinely surprised afterwards when one student, who'd argued passionately for creationism, admitted she was just practicing her debating skills.
Advocating a position she didn't actually believe.
Right, just because it was more challenging. Dawkins uses that to say, look, this book isn't about intellectual games. It's about meticulously explaining a scientific truth that he sees as profound, elegant, and just fundamentally important.
And that passion for clarity is vital because Darwinism as a concept, well, it often faces a unique kind of opposition.
How so?
As the Nobel laureate Jacques Monod shrewdly observed, everybody thinks he understands it. It appears disarmingly simple, right? Non-random reproduction, hereditary variation, add lots of time.
Seems straightforward enough.
Yet, this deceptively simple idea with its truly revolutionary power somehow eluded brilliant minds for centuries. Thinkers like Newton, Galileo, Aristotle, they didn't grasp it.
Which is bizarre when you think about it.
It begs the question, why did such a simple yet universally applicable idea stay hidden for so long? And why, even now, isn't it fully absorbed into popular consciousness? It suggests there's this deep-seated human resistance to an explanation that fundamentally challenges our gut feeling about direct conscious design.
Okay, let's pivot to a really crucial distinction Dawkins makes early on, defining complex design carefully. It's not just about something being varied or having lots of parts.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a mountain, Mont Blanc.
Right. It's definitely many-parted, heterogeneous, lots of different rocks jumbled together. If you sliced it anywhere, the two bits would be different.
It's certainly not a blancmange, that smooth, uniform pudding.
Definitely not. But he says Mont Blanc isn't complex in the specific biological sense we're interested in. Why not?
Because its structure isn't pre-specified for a particular function. That's the key.
Okay, unpack that. Pre-specified.
It's about purposeful improbability, not just any old rarity. Dawkins defines it as statistically improbable in a direction that is pre-specified, not merely identified with hindsight. Think about it like this. If you just hurled scrap metal around randomly, the odds against accidentally assembling a functional Boeing 747 that can actually fly are astronomical, right?
Vanishingly small, yeah.
The ability to fly is a pre-specified goal for a 747. You know what it's supposed to do. Mont Blanc, on the other hand, well, it's only special after it forms. Its specific shape wasn't some predefined target it was aiming for.
Ah, I see. So biological complexity, like an eye seeing or a heart pumping.
Exactly. It always has this quality of pre-specified function, a purpose it achieves, with an efficiency that looks incredibly improbable, demanding an explanation beyond just random chance.
Okay. Now, another fundamental point he makes is about how living things actively fight against equilibrium.
Yes, this constant struggle. Our bodies, for example, are tirelessly working to maintain a precise temperature, acidity, water content, actively pushing against the natural tendencies that would pull them towards the same conditions as their surroundings.
Like a constant balancing act.
It is. And the moment we die, that work stops. Body temperature drops or rises to match the air. Internal chemistry equalizes. We start to merge back into the environment. That persistent, active, internal regulation is a signature of life.
Does that mean living things are somehow violating the laws of physics? People sometimes wonder that.
That's a common misconception, but no, absolutely not. There's no mystical life force involved here. It just means that trying to apply physics only to the behavior of the whole living body can be misleading.
Okay.
Think about his bird analogy. Throw a dead bird, it follows a perfect parabola, obeying gravity.
Predictable physics.
But throw a live bird and it flies off. Not because it's defying gravity, but because its muscles are actively working, obeying the laws of physics at the cellular level, generating forces to counteract gravity and propel it.
So the complex behavior of the whole bird emerges from the interactions of its parts.
Precisely. It emerges as a consequence of the intricate interactions of its many internal parts, each behaving according to physical laws at its own level. Understanding this hierarchy is crucial for decoding how life works.
So how do we start to understand these incredibly complex things?
Yeah.
He talks about a hierarchical approach.
Yes, peeling back the layers. Imagine asking an engineer how a steam engine works. You wouldn't expect them to start talking about quarks and electrons, right?
No, you'd want the big picture first. Firebox, boiler, piston.
Exactly. You want the major subcomponents. You accept, for the moment, what each lone unit does, and then you understand how they interact to make the whole engine move.
And only then might you ask, okay, how does that specific part, like the steam governor, actually work?
Right. You peel down the hierarchy, asking how each part works in terms of its internal parts and so on.
So it's layers of understanding?
Fundamentally, whether it's a steam engine, a computer, or a living body, real comprehension comes from analyzing interactions at successive levels of this orderly hierarchy. You keep peeling down until you reach units simple enough that you don't feel the need to ask about their workings, though a physicist might keep going.
And this applies not just to how things work, but how they came to exist.
That's the crucial leap. This hierarchical principle for understanding mechanism also applies to explaining existence. Such intricacy couldn't arise in one go, one lucky chance event. Instead, its existence must be the result of gradual, cumulative, step-by-step transformations from simpler things simple enough to have plausibly come into being by chance.
So step by step, not one giant leap.
That's the core idea that sidesteps the impossibility of big-step reductionism when explaining biological complexity.
Wonders of natural engineering eyes and echolocation.
Okay, with that foundation set, let's dive into some specific examples Dawkins uses. These wonders of natural engineering, starting with a real classic, the vertebrate eye.
Ah, yes, the eye. Always a focal point in these discussions.
It really is a marvel, isn't it? At first glance, it just seems to scream, conscious designer. You've got this compound lens system, muscles for focusing, the image falling on the retina.
Packed with, what is it, 125 million photocells?
Something like that, yeah. And they're linked to about 3 million ganglion cells that are already doing some pre-processing before sending signals off to the brain.
And the detail within each photocell.
It's incredible. He mentions each one is like a tiny chemical factory. Its mitochondria processing over 700 different chemical substances.
That's just astounding complexity multiplied 125 million times over in each eye.
Exactly. But then, here's the kicker, right? The counterintuitive bit.
The backwards wiring,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
For anyone with an engineering mindset, this is where it gets really interesting. The vertebrate retina is famously wired in backwards.
Meaning?
Meaning the photoreceptors, the light-sensitive cells, instead of facing the incoming light, are buried at the back, facing away from it.
So the light has to go through everything else first.
Precisely. Their connecting wires then have to run across the surface of the retina, converge at one point the blind spot, and then dive through the retina to form the optic nerve.
A sensible designer would never do that.
You wouldn't think so, starting from scratch. The light has to pass through this sort of forest of connecting wires, experiencing some slight dimming and distortion. But this apparent imperfection isn't a flaw that disproves evolution.
It's evidence for it.
In a way, yes, it's powerful testimony to its evolutionary history. Evolution doesn't start with a blank slate aiming for perfect optimality. It tinkers. It modifies what's already there.
Leading to compromises that are just good enough.
Good enough rather than theoretically perfect from first principles. It reveals the path dependency of evolution.
What's maybe even more compelling is that we don't need to imagine this complex eye appearing in one giant leap.
Absolutely not. We can find a plausible, continuously graded series of intermediate eyes just by looking at animals alive today.
Like the pinhole eye of the Nautilus.
Exactly. It's lensless, just a cup with a small opening.
Yep.
But it's still significantly better than no eye at all. It can detect the direction of light.
And even a slight improvement on that. Like a crude transparent covering.
Would be an advantage. Even a slightly curved, translucent covering would start to act like a very basic lens. From there, you can easily imagine a series of small, cumulative improvements leading to a sophisticated true lens. And importantly, this isn't just one single evolutionary pathway.
Right, he talks about Michael Land's work.
That's right. What's truly striking is Land's observation that there are actually 9 basic physical principles for forming images used by eyes across the animal kingdom.
9 different ways to make an eye.
Essentially, yes. And most of them have evolved many times independently. Our camera eye, the kind vertebrates and cephalopods like squid have, is just one.
What are some others?
Well, there's the reflector principle, like in a telescope, which has
Yeah.
evolved multiple times in mollusks and crustaceans. Or the compound eye of insects and some crustaceans. Basically, a bank of many tiny eyes working together.
So evolution keeps arriving at similar solutions independently.
Repeatedly. Starting from vastly different ancestors, this convergent evolution is incredibly powerful evidence for nature's ability to find complex solutions through these blind step-by-step processes.
Okay, let's switch senses. Bats provide another extraordinary example. Echolocation.
Ah, bat sonar. Another marvel.
Not all bats use it, apparently, but many have independently invented these incredibly sophisticated sonar systems, very much like how humans developed radar, but biologically.
The diversity and refinement are just amazing. Take the fruit bat rosettus, for example.
Mhm.
It navigates in total darkness by making audible clicks with its tongue.
Audible. We could hear it.
Yes, and it measures the time intervals between its clicks and the returning echoes. It's a relatively cruder form of sonar compared to the ultrasonic clicks of most bats, but it clearly demonstrates the basic principle of ranging by sound. It's like a simpler step on a possible evolutionary path.
But the smaller bats, like the common little brown bat Myotis, take it way further, right?
Oh, absolutely. When Myotis is just cruising around, it might chunter clicks at about 10 per second. It's like getting intermittent snapshots of the world, like a stroboscope freezing a dancer's pose.
Okay, just checking things out.
But here's where it gets astonishing. When it detects an insect and goes into attack mode, its pulse rate skyrockets up to 200 pulses per second.
200.
Yeah. That creates an incredibly detailed, almost continuous echo image. It gives the bat a precise, dynamic picture of its prey's exact movements in real time, far beyond what our own vision could do in that situation.
And the engineering involved in just sending and receiving those sounds.
That's where it really shines. Bats evolved synapses switching millions of years before we did.
How does that work?
They have tiny muscles attached to the little bones in their ears, the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Just before the bat emits its incredibly loud ultrasonic pulse, these muscles contract, physically damping the ear bones.
Sort of like putting in earplugs.
Exactly. It protects their hearing from their own shout. Then, with split-second timing, the muscles relax just in time for the faint echo to return, allowing maximum sensitivity.
Wow, and they can do this rapidly.
Some bats, like Tadardi, can do this alternating contract-relax cycle 50 times per second. It's an incredible feat of timing and muscular control. Dawkins compares it to the WWI fighter planes synchronizing guns to fire through spinning propellers.
That's amazing. And the sounds themselves are complex, too. The FM sweeps.
Yes, many bats use frequency modulated, or FM, cries like a downward wolf whistle in pitch. This isn't random, it's ingenious.
How so?
By sweeping the pitch, they can easily distinguish echoes from the original sound, because the echo's pitch depends on when it reflected off something. More importantly, they can distinguish echoes from objects at different distances simultaneously. An echo from far away takes longer to return, so it corresponds to an older, higher-pitched part of the original sweep compared to an echo returning at the same time from something closer.
So for the bat, higher pitch effectively means farther away.
In a nutshell, yes.
Yeah.
It's a remarkably efficient way to map out a cluttered sonic world.
Okay, that's brilliant for static stuff. What about the ultimate challenge? A moving target, like an insect dodging.
Now that requires an even cleverer trick. Some bats, especially horseshoe bats, perform this feat. Instead of just emitting constant pitch hoots, they carefully adjust the pitch of their outgoing cries.
They change their own shout.
Constantly. They adjust it precisely to keep the returning echo pitch constant after it's been Doppler shifted by the moving target.
Wait, so the echo always sounds the same to the bat?
Exactly the same pitch. They actively tune their outgoing call, so the returning echo always hits the sweet spot frequency where their ears are most sensitive.
So how do they know the target's speed then?
They calculate the target's velocity not by the echo's pitch, because they're keeping that constant, but by monitoring the constantly changing pitch they themselves are having to emit to achieve that constant echo.
That is. Wow, like a biological guided missile system.
Pretty much. And it's a system that human sonar and radar engineers may well have learned from, or certainly could.
It's crucial to remember, though, as Dawkins stresses, the bat isn't consciously designing this. It doesn't understand the physics.
Not at all. The bat is like the police radar gun, not the engineer who designed the gun.
The radar gun doesn't understand the Doppler effect. Its electronics just compute it automatically.
Precisely. Similarly, the complex computations in the bat's brain happen automatically through evolved biological components, wired up by millions of years of natural selection, not conscious thought.
Disarming incredulity and building complexity incrementally.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a common hurdle people encounter when thinking about evolution. This feeling of personal incredulity.
Yes, the I just can't believe it argument.
Exactly. Dawkins points out that anti-evolutionists, like Bishop Montefiore he mentions, often rely heavily on what he calls the argument from personal incredulity.
Using phrases like, it's impossible to believe, or it's just too hard to understand how.
How could an organ so complex possibly evolve? They imply that the sheer complexity makes Darwinian explanations impossible.
But what's often overlooked is that the answers can be surprisingly simple if you just shift your perspective a little.
Like the polar bear example.
Right. Why are polar bears white? Someone might incredulously think about the odds of that mutation, forgetting that camouflage is vital not just for prey hiding, but for predators stalking seals on white ice. Once you consider the hunting strategy, the white coat makes perfect sense.
Or the spider web. How could that evolve step by step?
It simply ignores the immense timescales and the countless tiny incremental changes involved. Dawkins basically says, just because you find it hard to imagine the intermediate steps doesn't mean they didn't exist, or that evolution couldn't have found them.
And that leads directly to the root cause of a lot of this incredulity, doesn't it? Our human inability to really grasp deep time.
Absolutely. Our intuition about time is scaled to our own lives decades. 100 years feels long to us.
We can accept small changes over that time, maybe. Like the moths getting darker after the Industrial Revolution.
Right, we see that happen in about a century, and we say, okay, but that's just a small change, it's still a moth.
But 100 years, which feels long to us, is practically instantaneous in geological terms, like 1,000 times shorter than a geologist can usually even measure.
Exactly. So when we think about huge transformations, like evolving an eye or echolocation, our everyday sense of time just fails us. We can't intuitively grasp the sheer scale needed for all those tiny cumulative steps.
So our incredulity often stems from failing to comprehend the immensities of time available for evolutionary change.
Precisely. Evolution isn't about big, single leaps. It's about countless, successive, slight modifications over vast stretches of time. Each tiny change, even with a minuscule advantage, gets accumulated over millions of generations.
Which brings us to another crucial distinction Dawkins makes: the difference between simple sorting and cumulative selection.
Yes, this is fundamental. The world is full of natural sieves that can create non-randomness, things that look like design but aren't.
Like a hole sorting pebbles by size.
Exactly. Smaller ones fall through, bigger ones stay. Or consider the solar system. Planets orbit at exactly the right velocity, not because of design, but because it's a gravitational sieve.
Anything not at the right speed either got flung out or crashed into the sun long ago.
Right. We see them there because they survived the sieve. That's not conscious design, it's just physics sorting things out. Dawkins calls this single-step selection.
But that's different from evolution.
Critically different from cumulative selection. In single-step selection, things get sorted once. Boom, done. In cumulative selection, the entities reproduce, and the results of one round of sieving become the input for the next round.
So improvements build on previous improvements.
Yes, over many generations. The end product of one generation is literally the starting point for the next. This cumulative power is the absolute essential ingredient for generating real, complex design. Without it, he says, evolution would never have got anywhere. It's that repeated, small, incremental filtering over huge timescales that builds the improbable.
And Darwin himself understood how central this gradual, cumulative process was. He made that incredibly bold statement.
The challenge, yes. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down.
And here we are, over 125 years later.
And still no such case is known. Dawkins says if one were found, he'd stop believing in Darwinism himself. But for many, that's where the incredulity really bites. But what about this specific organ? Surely that couldn't be formed by slight modifications?
How do we address that directly?
Well, often the answer lies in realizing evolution isn't aiming for theoretical perfection, but just good enough to get by and reproduce.
The imperfections argument.
Exactly. Stephen Jay Gould famously argued in his essay on the panda's thumb that imperfections can sometimes be even stronger evidence for evolution than perfect design.
Like the flatfish.
Perfect example. Skates and rays flatten symmetrically, top to bottom. But plaice and sole, which are bony fish related to things like herrings, flattened vertically, meaning they had to lie on their side.
So one eye would be staring uselessly into the sand.
Right. So over evolutionary time, that bottom eye migrated around the head, twisting the entire skull to bring both eyes onto the upper sandy-colored side.
Which looks really weird if you see the skull.
It's bizarre. No sensible designer starting fresh would ever create such a twisted, asymmetric skull. But evolution doesn't start fresh. It starts from what's already there. That monstrosity, as Dawkins calls it, that seemingly bad design, is powerful testimony to its history of step-by-step change, compromises built on pre-existing structures.
Just like the backward wired retina in our own eyes.
Exactly. Another prime example of an imperfection that beautifully reveals its evolutionary lineage.
The digital code of life and the dawn of replicators.
Okay, let's shift perspective again. Moving from the grand sweep of evolutionary history down to the very foundation of life's information. But first, a quick detour into geology continental drift.
Right, plate tectonics seems like a tangent, but it's deeply relevant to evolutionary patterns.
The Earth's surface isn't fixed. Over these immense timescales, similar to evolutionary time, continents have drifted, broken apart, collided. Wegener's idea, once mocked, is now fundamental. Supercontinents like Gondwanaland and Laurasia split up.
And this is incredibly significant for evolution because it literally created separate evolutionary laboratories around the globe.
Independent vacuums.
Pretty much. When the dinosaurs died out, they left huge ecological niches vacant. The small mammals that were around at the time, often nocturnal, suddenly had opportunities to diversify and fill these roles. But they did so independently on different, now separated landmasses: Australia, South America, the Old World, Africa, or Asia.
So they evolved in parallel.
Often, yes, showing remarkable convergence. Each major ecological trade, burrowing underground, being a large predator, grazing on plains, saw similar forms evolve independently on different continents.
Like the South American examples he gives, the rhino-like things.
Exactly. South America developed these massive rhino-like herbivores called toxodonts, and also horse-like grazers called litopterns. Utterly unrelated to true rhinos and horses, but stunningly similar in form because they adapted to similar lifestyles.
And we see this convergence everywhere.
Again and again. Australia is famous for it with its marsupials. Marsupial moles that look and live just like placental moles elsewhere, complete with huge digging forepaws.
The thylacine, the Tasmanian wolf.
They're uncannily dog-like in appearance, and presumably habits, though it was a marsupial. And various kinds of anteaters evolved independently in different places to exploit termites and ants. It's like nature keeps hitting upon the same successful designs when faced with the same environmental problems, even starting from different evolutionary points.
Even in insects.
Oh, absolutely. Ants and termites, though only distantly related, show stunning convergences in social structure. Both independently evolved sterile worker castes, specialized soldiers.
And fungus farming?
Yes. Some groups in both ants in the New World and termites in Africa independently invented agriculture, cultivating fungi in special gardens, fungi found nowhere else. It's incredible.
Or the army ants and driver ants.
Right. Driver ants in Africa, army ants in the Americas, independently evolved this legionary habit, moving their entire colony, queen, brood, and all, in these vast, ruthless raiding armies. Strikingly similar behavior and even appearance, despite being on separate evolutionary lines. Powerful convergence.
So after seeing all these incredible, diverse forms, what is the underlying information system? What allows all this? It's not electronics.
Now it's chemistry. Life's fundamental storage medium uses polymers, long-chain molecules like DNA and RNA. These chains are made of repeating units, but crucially, the units aren't all the same. They're heterogeneous small molecules called nucleotides.
The A, T, C, and G.
Exactly. Instead of the binary ones and zeros of our computers, life uses a four-state, or quaternary code. This chemical system allows for digital information storage, much like ours, but with a four-letter alphabet. This digital nature was a fundamental breakthrough, the essential prerequisite for cumulative selection to work.
And DNA functions kind of like read-only memory, ROM.
In a very important sense, yes. Within an individual organism's lifetime, the DNA sequence in its cells generally cannot be deliberately written to or changed by experience apart from occasional random errors, mutations.
So you can't inherit acquired characteristics that way.
Correct. However, the collective genetic memory of a species absolutely can be constructively written to over generations
Oh.
through the non-random survival and reproductive success of individuals.
So natural selection is the writing process.
Effectively, yes. It writes improved instructions for survival into the species' collective gene pool as generations pass. The fundamental addressing system stays the same, but the statistical content of the genes changes, leading to evolutionary progress.
Okay, but if all the cells in my body have the same DNA, the same genes, why aren't they all identical? Why do I have liver cells and kidney cells and brain cells?
Excellent question. It's because a different subset of those genes is actively read or expressed in different kinds of cells. The others are ignored in that cell type.
So liver cells only read the liver-relevant genes.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And kidney cells read the kidney-relevant ones. What determines which genes are active depends on the chemical environment within the cell and signals from neighboring cells. When a cell divides, its daughter cells might get slightly different chemical signals, causing them to switch on different sets of genes.
And this leads to divergence.
Yes, a self-reinforcing divergence. It's a local, autonomous process happening millions of times all over the developing body, not dictated by some central control room. That's how complex bodies with specialized tissues and organs form from a single fertilized egg.
And this ties into the idea of rival DNA, genes competing.
Absolutely. Natural selection, at its core, is about the differential success of rival DNA sequences in getting themselves propagated down through the generations. That's the ultimate measure of vertical transmission.
But how they succeed depends on what they do.
Usually, yes. The criterion for success is often the action the genes have on bodies, what Dawkins calls sideways transmission of effects. Think of a gene variant that helps make sharper teeth in a tiger.
That helps the tiger hunt better, survive, reproduce?
Right. So the tiger passes on more copies of that sharp teeth gene variant. Even though it's the effect on the body, sharper teeth, that provides the immediate advantage, it's the underlying gene itself that ultimately benefits by increasing its frequency in the gene pool.
The accuracy of this whole copying process, DNA replication, it's just staggering.
It really is. He uses the example of the histone H4 gene. It's been copied maybe 20 billion times since the common ancestor of cows and peas lived.
Cows and peas, that's a long time ago.
Billions of copyings. And yet it's preserved over 99% of its information content across that divide.
How accurate is that in relatable terms?
His analogy is mind-bending. Imagine 20 billion typists in a line long enough to circle the Earth 500 times. For them to match DNA's fidelity, each typist could make only one error while typing out the entire Bible 250,000 times.
That's impossible to comprehend. A human typist's error rate is way higher.
About 500 million times higher, he estimates. It just underscores the incredible fidelity of life's information system.
So how does DNA achieve that accuracy? It can't just be passive.
Definitely not. The DNA copying machinery itself incorporates incredibly sophisticated proofreading and repair mechanisms. These aren't just occasional fixes, they are constantly active.
Constantly scanning and repairing.
Yes, estimates suggest they fix something like 5,000 degenerating DNA letters per cell per day. Without these tireless repair crews, the genetic message would just dissolve under the constant bombardment of normal molecular jostling and environmental damage.
So the information is durable because of active maintenance, not because the molecule itself is indestructible.
Exactly. The durability is an active, achieved property, itself a product of natural selection.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate origin question. Where did this all start? The origin of life itself. What's the absolute essential ingredient needed for a dead planet like the early Earth to spark into life?
Not some mystical life force or vital spark. The key property, Dawkins argues, is self-replication.
Things making copies of themselves.
That's the fundamental prerequisite. That's the property that allows cumulative selection to even get started. The very first replicators were likely much simpler, much cruder than today's DNA, because a complex molecule like DNA probably couldn't just pop into existence spontaneously without the help of other complex molecules only found in existing cells.
So self-replication first. What else is needed?
Two other ingredients follow almost automatically. First, occasional errors in copying mutations. Even our super accurate DNA makes mistakes. The first replicators were likely far sloppier.
Errors provide variation?
Crucial variation, yes. Second, at least some of these replicators need to exert power over their own future. Not in a conscious way. It just means their inherent physical or chemical properties should influence their probability of being replicated. For instance, maybe some early molecules were slightly more stable or slightly better at grabbing raw materials, or, as he suggests, maybe less sticky ones that let go of their copies faster could churn out more copies and come to dominate. Elementary natural selection, right there at the molecular level.
And we've actually seen this happen, evolution in a test tube.
We have. Experiments with the Q beta virus, which uses RNA as its genetic material, beautifully demonstrate this. Scientists put Q beta RNA in a test tube with the necessary building blocks and replicating enzyme.
And it copies itself.
Yes. But then they can introduce challenges, like a poison, ethidium bromide. They take a drop from the first tube, put it in a second tube with fresh ingredients and the poison, let it replicate, take a drop to a third tube, and so on.
Serial transfer.
Right. And over just 70 or 100 of these test tube transfer generations, the RNA molecules evolve. They become resistant to the poison, able to replicate faster even in its presence.
Wow. So evolution happens right there, rapidly.
Astonishingly rapidly. It powerfully shows cumulative selection driving adaptive change in a simplified molecular system.
And the key is that it's automatic, non-deliberate.
Utterly. The molecules don't know anything. Their structure just happens to promote copying. They don't work out a strategy. If any entity, anywhere, happens to have properties that make it good at getting itself copied, then automatically more copies of that entity will appear.
And because errors happen,
And these things form lineages, later versions will tend to be better at self-copying than earlier ones, thanks to cumulative selection filtering out the less successful variants. It's simple, automatic, almost inevitable once you have replication with errors.
to really get the indirect power of genes, he uses the beaver dam example.
Yes, a hypothetical but illustrative case. Imagine a tiny mutation in one gene. Let's call it gene G.
Okay.
This mutation subtly changes the wiring in the beaver's developing brain. Maybe it makes the beaver hold a log just a fraction higher in the water as it swims.
Seems like a small thing.
But maybe holding it higher means less mud washes off the log. So the log is effectively stickier when the beaver places it in the dam.
Making it more likely to stay put.
Exactly, improving the dam structure slightly. So you have this long, indirect causal chain, altered gene, altered protein, altered brain connections, altered behavior, holding log higher, improved dam better lodge food storage, improved survival and reproduction for the beaver carrying gene G.
Wow, that's a long chain from gene to survival benefit.
It can be, sometimes 11 or more links, he suggests. But the causal connection, however indirect, is still there, traced back to that DNA change. Natural selection operates on the final effect, favoring the underlying gene.
Okay, this brings us to a huge question. The sheer improbability. How much luck are we allowed when we think about the origin of life?
A critical point. The odds against complex life arising by pure single-step chance on a given planet are just astronomical. His monkey typing Shakespeare example illustrates this. The odds of getting, methinks it's like a weasel. By chance are 1 in 10 to the power of 40, numbers we can barely comprehend.
So how do we deal with that improbability?
The key is understanding the ration of luck we're allowed. It depends entirely on how many opportunities there were, how many planets in the universe might be suitable for life.
Potentially billions upon billions. Maybe 10, 20, he suggests.
A huge number. So even if the probability of life spontaneously generating on any single specific planet over billions of years is incredibly tiny, say 1 in a billion, 1018, the sheer number of planets makes it almost inevitable that it happens somewhere.
So what looks like a miracle locally becomes almost a statistical certainty cosmically?
Precisely. We're allowed to postulate one colossal stroke of luck for the origin of life somewhere in the universe, because the universe is so vast. We just happen to be on a planet where it did happen.
But what if the very first replicators weren't even organic? There's that fascinating idea from Karen Smith.
Yes. Graham Karen Smith's clay hypothesis. A really ingenious low-tech alternative. He proposed that mineral crystals, specifically certain types of clays, could have acted as the original rudimentary replicators.
Clay? How could clay replicate?
Well, crystals grow by adding layers, and as they grow, they can incorporate imperfections or flaws in their structure. Crucially, these specific patterns of flaws can sometimes be inherited by subsequent layers as the crystal grows. And if fragments break off...
They can act as seeds carrying that pattern.
Exactly. These fragments could seed the growth of new crystals that replicate the parent crystal's unique flaw pattern. It's a form of heredity, albeit a very simple, inorganic one.
And this could allow for selection.
Karen Smith argues yes. It offers many opportunities for rudimentary cumulative selection to get going. Different crystal varieties, defined by their flaw patterns, might have slightly different properties affecting their persistence and spread.
Like how easily they break, or how well they stick to surfaces.
Or maybe how they influence water flow, damming tiny streams, which might concentrate the necessary food chemicals for further crystal growth. Or maybe some varieties are better at getting broken into delta particles and blown around, spreading themselves further.
So crystals competing based on physical properties?
Essentially, no consciousness involved, just physics. The world would automatically tend to become filled with those varieties of clay that just happen to have properties making them persist and spread more effectively.
And where do organic molecules like RNA and proteins fit in?
Here's the next step in his hypothesis. Karen Smith speculates that organic molecules, which were likely present in the primordial soup, initially served as mere tools or assistants for these inorganic crystal replicators.
Tools? How?
Maybe they help the crystals grow faster or break apart more effectively or stick to surfaces better. Organic molecules are actually used today in commercial chemistry for precisely these kinds of effects on inorganic processes. So these organics weren't self-replicating yet, but acted as primitive phenotypes, external aids that improve the replication success of the mineral gene.
Okay, so minerals replicating, using organics as tools. Then what?
Then comes the genetic takeover. Eventually, perhaps boosted by the catalytic help of the crystals, a new type of self-replicating molecule emerged from this system, maybe RNA or something similar.
The organic replicator.
Yes. And this new organic replicator was so much more efficient at copying itself and storing information than the clunky clay crystals that it completely took over the primary role of heredity.
And the clays were just discarded?
Cast aside like worn-out scaffolding, as Dawkins puts it, all modern life, with its universal DNA code and shared biochemistry, then descended from this more efficient organic replicator which arose from that initial mineral-based system. It's a compelling, though speculative, story for how cumulative selection could have gotten its very first start.
Evolutionary spirals, red queens, and brain power.
All right, let's move on to how evolution can sometimes accelerate, leading to really dramatic changes. He talks about positive and negative feedback.
Yes, crucial concepts. Negative feedback is all about stability and regulation, like a thermostat keeping temperature steady or James Watt's steam governor controlling engine speed. It counteracts deviations.
Keeps things in check.
But positive feedback is the opposite. It amplifies deviations, leading to unstable runaway processes. Think of a nuclear explosion, or maybe less dramatically, a microphone placed too close to its speaker, causing that escalating screech. Or even, as he humorously suggests, a schoolmaster's temper.
Where a small thing triggers a bigger reaction, which triggers an even bigger one.
Exactly, an accelerating, self-reinforcing spiral. And this applies powerfully to evolution.
How so? Through sexual selection.
That's the classic example, demonstrated mathematically by R.A. Fisher, his theory of runaway sexual selection.
Okay, explain that.
Imagine females in a species develop a slight genetic preference for males with a particular trait, say, slightly longer tails.
Just an arbitrary preference initially.
It could be completely arbitrary, or maybe linked to some indicator of health. But if males with longer tails are then more successful at mating, because of the female preference, they pass on their genes for longer tails. But their daughters also inherit the genes for preferring longer tails from their mothers.
So the trait and the preference get linked together.
Genetically linked. And they mutually reinforce each other. Females prefer long tails, so males evolve longer tails. As longer tails become more common, the female preference for them is also strengthened, which drives tails to become even longer.
Leading to an explosive runaway spiral.
Exactly, an ever-increasing spiral of extravagance, like the magnificent but clearly cumbersome tail of a peacock, or the incredibly elaborate plumage of birds of paradise. Fisher showed mathematically this could advance with accelerating, even exponential speed.
To really understand why this happens, he uses that thought experiment.
Right.
The green beard effect.
Right. A hypothetical scenario to illustrate the principle. Imagine a single gene that does two things. It gives you a visible marker, like a green beard, and it makes you behave altruistically towards anyone else who also has a green beard.
So the gene recognizes copies of itself in others.
Effectively, yes, via the beard marker. That gene would spread like wildfire because it's directly helping copies of itself survive and reproduce in other individuals.
Okay, so how does that relate to long tails?
In runaway sexual selection, the female preference genes are doing something subtly similar. By choosing males with the preferred trait, long tails, the genes for the preference are indirectly favoring their own propagation because they tend to end up in offspring alongside the genes for the trait they prefer. They're hitching a ride with the successful male genes they select.
So any slight initial majority preference just snowballs.
It becomes self-reinforcing. If slightly more females happen to prefer long tails, then long-tailed males have more offspring. Their sons get the long tails, and their daughters get the preference, making the preference even stronger in the next generation.
It creates a sort of unstable situation.
Yes, what Fisher called a line of equilibria. The system can drift along this line, but any nudge in one direction tends to amplify itself. Like a tree starting to fall, once it leans a bit, gravity takes over and pulls it down faster and faster. Arbitrary beginnings become self-reinforcing.
Now, evolution isn't just about preferences or adapting to static things like the weather. There are living enemies involved.
A crucial point. Predators, prey, parasites, hosts. They create dynamic, constantly changing environments for each other. For a cheetah, gazelles aren't just out there. They're a vital, evolving part of its environment.
And for the gazelles, the cheetah is a major environmental pressure.
Exactly. This sets up a very different kind of evolutionary dynamic compared to just adapting to climate change.
It leads to arms races?
Evolutionary arms races. Cheetahs get faster and stealthier because gazelles get more alert and quicker at dodging, and gazelles get better at escaping. Vicious spiral, as Dawkins calls it, operating over potentially hundreds of thousands of years. Each side evolves in response to the improvements made by the other. The average gazelle isn't adapting to yesterday's cheetah, it's adapting to an incrementally better cheetah, and vice versa.
Driving both lineages to greater sophistication.
Even if their relative success rates, the cheetah's chance of catching a gazelle or the gazelle's chance of escape remain roughly constant over time.
Which brings us to that iconic concept, the Red Queen effect.
From Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, yes. The Red Queen tells Alice, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place.
And in evolution.
In an arms race, Both sides keep improving their equipment, running speed, camouflage, detection abilities, but neither gains a lasting advantage over the other. Success rates might stay constant even as the absolute level of sophistication skyrockets on both sides.
So progress in design just keeps pace with the opponent's progress.
Exactly, resulting in no net gain and relative advantage, just a continuous dynamic struggle.
Are all arms races the same, though?
Good question. Dawkins distinguishes between symmetric and asymmetric arms races.
Okay.
A symmetric race is where both sides are evolving along the same dimension, like trees growing taller to compete for light, or Cold War powers building bombs with bigger megatonnage. It leads to general escalation.
And asymmetric.
That's more like predator versus prey, or parasite versus host, or maybe a missile versus its specific countermeasure, like a jamming device. Here, the adaptations become much more intricately meshed and interlocked.
Like point-for-point counter-adaptation.
Precisely. The designer of the antidote, or the gazelle's defense, takes into account minute details of the poison or the cheetah's attack, and vice versa. Generation after generation, this drives ever greater sophistication and complexity in the specific details of the interacting systems.
And this fine-tuned complexity is what we see in things like bat sonar.
Exactly. It shows all the hallmarks of a long, highly specific, asymmetric arms race.
Can we see evidence of arms races in the fossil record? What about brains? They don't fossilize well.
Brains themselves don't, but brain cases do. By carefully studying fossil skulls, paleontologists can estimate the brain size of extinct animals.
But bigger animals need bigger brains just to run the body, right?
Right. Correct. So you can't just look at absolute size, you need to account for body size. Scientists use something called the encephalization quotient, or EQ, which compares actual brain size to the expected brain size for an animal of that body mass. It gives a measure of relative braininess. Harry Jerrison's work here was pioneering.
And what did Jerrison find? Evidence for brain arms races.
Compelling evidence, yes. He found a clear trend. Generally, brains tended to get bigger over millions of years. But crucially, he found that at any given time, contemporary carnivores consistently had larger relative brains, higher EQs, than the herbivores they preyed upon.
Predators needed to be smarter than prey.
Seems that way. But it wasn't static. As time went on, later herbivores evolved larger brains than earlier herbivores, and later carnivores evolved larger brains than earlier carnivores, too.
Like a step-by-step escalation on both sides.
Exactly. It strongly suggests ongoing arms races between predators and prey, with the brain acting as the critical onboard computer, its processing power constantly being pushed by the escalating demands of hunting and evasion.
It still seems a bit paradoxical. Genes are selfish, driving their own propagation, but they also cooperate.
It seems paradoxical, but it makes sense when you consider that a gene's environment includes other genes. Specifically, the other genes it's likely to share a body with.
So genes that play well with others do better.
Genes that cooperate effectively with the other genes typically found in the same species gene pool are favored because their fates are tied together in the success or failure of the individual body they collectively build.
And that cooperation is why we have complex bodies in the first place.
Precisely. Large, multicellular bodies are survival machines, as Dawkins famously called them, built by these cooperatives of genes. All the genes within one body generally benefit from the same outcome, the survival and successful reproduction of that communal vehicle.
So natural selection isn't just weeding things out, it's actively building cooperative systems.
It becomes a profoundly constructive force, yes, building intricate, coherent organisms out of initially competing selfish genetic units. Without that emergent cooperation, we'd still be just a soup of simple replicators.
Can we draw parallels to human culture? He touches on analogies.
We have to be careful with analogies, distinguish fruitful ones from foolish ones, as he says. But yes, human culture definitely shows dynamics that resemble positive feedback and perhaps even arms races.
Like technological improvement.
Think of the undeniable explosive improvement in transportation technology, from horse-drawn carts to supersonic jets in a relatively short span, or the objective improvements in sound fidelity over the decades. These look like progressive, cumulative, self-reinforcing trends.
Not just random changes in fashion.
No, there's real improvement. Even things like bestseller lists in publishing show positive feedback. A book hits a certain threshold, gets more attention, which leads to more sales, more attention. It takes off exponentially.
Similar to Fisher's runaway selection.
The underlying dynamic, how arbitrary beginnings can become self-reinforcing and lead to runaway phenomena, seems mathematically similar, even though the mechanism cultural transmission versus genetic inheritance, is different.
The pace of evolution, gradualism, gaps, and speciation.
Okay, let's talk about the pace of evolution and how we interpret the fossil record. If we had a truly perfect, complete fossil record, what would the simplest, maybe caricatured version of gradualism expect?
Well, a caricature might expect perfectly smooth, constant rates of change,
Yeah.
like a horse's leg bones getting exactly 1/millionth of an inch longer every single year, generation after generation, without fail.
Okay.
A clean, steady, predictable progression.
But reality isn't always that neat. Even seemingly rapid changes are slow generation by generation.
Exactly. Take one of the fastest major evolutionary changes we know of.
Absolutely.
The swelling of the human brain. It nearly tripled in size, from maybe 500 cc in an Australopithecus-like ancestor to around 1400 cc in modern Homo sapiens.
And that happened relatively quickly.
In geological terms, yes, maybe over just 3 million years or so. That's fast for such a major change. But break it down per generation. Assuming roughly 20 years per generation, that's less than 1/100th of a cubic centimeter increase per generation.
That sounds tiny, almost imperceptible.
It does. And it highlights a common misunderstanding. It's hard to intuitively grasp how such a tiny increment could offer a significant survival advantage each time. For comparison, the brain size difference between, say, Anatole France, a Nobel laureate with a brain under 1,000 cc, and someone like Oliver Cromwell, reportedly over 2,000 cc, is huge. That 0.01 cc per generation seems negligible in comparison, yet compounded over millions of years, it adds up immensely.
This then leads to discussions about gaps in the fossil record and the theory of punctuated equilibria.
Right, proposed by Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould. It addresses the common observation that species often seem to appear rather suddenly in the fossil record, then persist largely unchanged for long stretches, what they call stasis, and then disappear, perhaps replaced by another species that also appears suddenly.
But this isn't about huge single-step jumps like macromutations. That's a different idea, right?
Very important distinction. Punctuated equilibria is not saltationism, the idea of evolution by big jumps. Saltationism involves macromutations, mutations with very large effects.
Do macromutations happen?
Oh, they definitely occur. We see them in labs. The classic example is Antennapedia in fruit flies, where a mutation causes legs to grow on the head where the antenna should be.
A major developmental mess-up.
Exactly. These monsters or developmental freaks do arise, but they are almost always severely disadvantageous in the wild. They wouldn't survive or reproduce. Saltationists, like Richard Goldschmidt back in the day, speculated that maybe major evolutionary transitions like ape to human could happen in one such macromutational step, a hopeful monster.
But the complexity argument works against that.
Strongly. Dawkins uses Fisher's microscope analogy again. If your microscope is almost in focus, a tiny random tweak, a micromutation, has about a 50% chance of improving the focus.
Makes sense.
But if you make a large random adjustment, a macromutation, you're almost certain to make the focus much worse, no matter which way you turn the knob. Adaptive improvement, especially of complex systems, relies on small, cumulative steps, each having a decent chance of being beneficial, not wild leaps.
So assembling a complex eye in one go, a Boeing 747 macromutation, is out.
Completely out. That is like a hurricane assembling a plane from scrap, functionally impossible via chance mutation.
But are all large effect mutations impossible drivers? What about stretched DC8 mutations?
That's a key subtlety. Dawkins distinguishes between the two. A stretched DC8 macromutation is one that causes a large change in the adult form, but isn't necessarily large in terms of complexity.
Like adding more of the same.
Exactly. Think of a snake evolving an extra vertebra. That's a macro change in the adult, a whole extra segment with associated nerves, muscles, blood vessels. But embryonically, it might result from a relatively micro change, a small tweak in the developmental timing, or signals that just repeats an existing pattern one more time.
So it looks big, but the underlying change is small.
Relatively small in informational terms. Such mutations, adding more of the same, can potentially be incorporated into evolution. They're fundamentally different from conjuring up entirely new, complex machinery in one step.
Okay, so if not by big jumps, how do new species actually originate? What's the standard view?
The standard orthodox view is speciation, primarily through geographical isolation.
A population gets split by a mountain range, a river, continents drifting.
Exactly. Think of the ancestors of lions and tigers. Separated geographically, they couldn't interbreed. Over time, isolated populations accumulate different mutations, adapt to slightly different local conditions.
They diverge genetically.
They diverge, eventually becoming so different that even if they were reunited, they couldn't successfully interbreed anymore. Boom, you have two distinct species.
So how does this explain the apparent sudden appearance in the fossil record if the process is gradual?
This is where punctuated equilibria offers an elegant explanation consistent with gradualism within populations. Imagine our shrew population again. A small group gets isolated, maybe beyond a mountain range.
Okay.
In that small, isolated population, perhaps conditions are different, and they evolve relatively rapidly, but still gradually, generation by generation into a new form, a new species.
But we don't have fossils from that isolated spot.
Probably not. Then maybe conditions change, the mountains erode, and this new species expands back into the ancestral homeland. If it's now competitively superior, it might quickly replace the original shrew population.
So in the main fossil record, where we do have fossils, the old species disappears and the new one appears suddenly.
Exactly. It looks sudden in that location, even though the evolutionary change itself was gradual, just happening elsewhere, off-stage, paleontologically. This explains the punctuation without needing non-gradual leaps within a lineage.
So punctuationists aren't really against gradualism per se. They still think change happens generation by generation.
Correct. They're not arguing for saltationism. Their main point is against the idea of constant, slow, steady change within a lineage, what they sometimes caricature as phyletic gradualism. They emphasize that most evolutionary change seems concentrated in relatively rapid bursts during speciation events,
The punctuation points.
followed by potentially very long periods of stasis, where established species exhibit little or no significant morphological change.
What about stasis? Why would a species stay the same for millions of years? Like the coelacanth,
A
Latimeria?
famous living fossil. It looks remarkably similar to fossils hundreds of millions of years old. One view is simply that it found a stable deep-sea niche where selective pressures for change were minimal. It had no need to evolve.
Makes sense.
Some punctuationists, however, have sometimes hinted at a different idea, that maybe species possess inherent genetic mechanisms that actively resist change, even if there are selective pressures. An internal inertia.
Is there evidence for that? Intrinsic resistance?
Well, Dawkins argues strongly against it, pointing to artificial selection. Look at domestic animals. Cattle bred for milk yield, chickens for egg laying, dogs for myriad shapes and sizes. Breeders find that populations respond immediately to selective pressure.
They don't hit some initial barrier to change.
No, change usually starts readily. The difficulties come later, often when genetic variation for the desired trait starts to run out, not because of some built-in anti-evolutionary force. This suggests stasis in the fossil record is more likely due to periods of stabilizing selection or lack of strong directional pressure, rather than an active internal resistance to change.
The tree of life, convergence, and molecular clocks.
Okay, let's think about how we classify this staggering diversity of life. Dawkins makes a point that, unlike how we classify books in a library or philosophical ideas, living organisms seem to have one uniquely correct hierarchical classification.
Yes, it's a fundamental property of life as we know it. It can be represented as a tree whose branches always diverge and never converge again.
A branching tree, not a network.
Almost entirely. There are very rare exceptions, like the ancient merging events that likely formed the complex eukaryotic cell, endosymbiosis, but overwhelming, the pattern is divergence. This is fundamentally different from how we might classify, say, cars, where a sporty model might also be classified as a convertible, creating overlaps.
And this leads to the idea of perfect nesting.
Exactly. Think about drawing rings around related groups. A small ring contains just rats and mice. A larger ring contains all rodents, including rats, mice, squirrels, beavers. An even larger ring contains all mammals, rodents, carnivores, primates.
And these rings never partially overlap.
They never intersect in a way that something is partly in one ring and partly in another unless one ring is entirely inside the other. You're either a rodent or not. You're either a mammal or not. This property of perfect taxonomic nesting isn't found in non-biological classifications.
Why is life like that? Why this perfect hierarchy?
It's a direct and powerful consequence of evolutionary descent from common ancestors. The branching pattern of evolution creates this nested hierarchy. It's arguably the strongest evidence we have for the fact of evolution itself.
But the clear lines we see today between, say, birds and mammals, They seem very distinct.
They seem distinct now only because the vast majority of intermediate forms that once connected them are extinct.
Ah, the connecting branches are gone.
If we had a truly complete fossil record, showing every single ancestor and transitional form, classifying them into neat, discrete groups like bird or mammal would become incredibly difficult, maybe impossible. We'd see a continuous spectrum.
Which leads to that ethically provocative point he makes about humans and chimps.
Yes, it's a really challenging thought experiment. The clear moral and legal distinction we make between humans and all other animals, particularly our closest relatives like chimpanzees, relies heavily on the absence of living intermediates.
We share, what, 99% of our DNA with chimps?
Mhm.
And the common ancestor wasn't that long ago, evolutionarily speaking.
Maybe only 5 or 6 million years ago. So Dawkins asks, what if, on some forgotten island, we discovered a whole spectrum of surviving intermediate species, bridging the gap between modern humans and modern chimps?
How would our legal and ethical systems cope?
It would throw them into chaos. Would we grant full human rights, votes for chimps, as he quips, to the entire spectrum? Or would we try to draw arbitrary lines, creating complex legal battles to determine who counts as legally human versus legally chimps? It forces us to confront how much our current species-based morality depends on the sheer historical accident that these embarrassing intermediates are extinct.
Shifting down to the molecular level, the evidence for a single origin gets even stronger, right? The universal genetic code.
Absolutely. All known living things, from bacteria to blue whales to redwood trees, use essentially the same genetic language. The same dictionary of 64 three-letter DNA words, codons, specifying the same amino acids.
And this dictionary is arbitrary. Like, why CAT spells cat?
Exactly. There's no obvious chemical reason why, say, the codon GAA must code for glutamic acid. It just does, across almost all life. The odds of the exact same arbitrary dictionary evolving independently multiple times are practically zero. It's near conclusive proof of a single common ancestor for all life on Earth today.
But while the dictionary is universal, the actual sentences, the proteins are different.
Definitely. And this is where we can measure relatedness with amazing precision. We can compare the sequence of amino acids in a particular protein, like hemoglobin or cytochrome C, between different species.
Like comparing the human version and the horse version.
Right. The number of differences in the sequence gives us a direct measure of their genetic distance, how far apart they are in genetic hyperspace, reflecting how long ago they shared a common ancestor.
And this leads to the molecular clock idea.
Yes, this is fascinating. It turns out that for many proteins, or parts of proteins, mutations seem to accumulate at a roughly constant rate over long periods of evolutionary time. Especially mutations that are neutral, they don't significantly help or harm the organism, so selection doesn't strongly act on them.
They just tick away like a clock.
Pretty much. So, by counting the number of differences between the same molecule in two different species, we can estimate not just how closely related they are, but also roughly when their common ancestor lived. It's become a hugely powerful tool for reconstructing the timescale of the tree of life.
How do scientists actually build these family trees, these taxonomies?
They use various methods, often now involving powerful computers. Techniques like numerical taxonomy and cladistics measure hundreds or thousands of characteristics, morphological features, behaviors, and increasingly molecular sequences, DNA or protein.
And try to find the most likely branching pattern.
Exactly. They fit the data to find the hierarchical pattern, the tree, that best explains the observed similarities and differences. There's still debate about the best methods, but the goal is always to uncover the true evolutionary history.
What's the biggest challenge in doing that?
The biggest bugbear, as Dawkins calls it, is convergent evolution.
When unrelated animals evolve similar features independently because they live similar lives.
Right, like the marsupial moles and placental moles, or those army ants and driver ants, or even dolphins, mammals, and ichthyosaurs, extinct marine reptiles, evolving similar streamlined shapes for swimming fast. These superficial similarities due to lifestyle can easily mislead a taxonomist relying only on morphology.
So how do they sort it out?
Molecular evidence is often the key. Comparing DNA or protein sequences usually cuts through the convergence, revealing the true, deeper evolutionary relationships based on shared ancestry, even when outward appearances are deceptive. It helps untangle the branches where convergence might otherwise fool us.
Doomed rivals. Why Darwinism stands alone.
Okay, we're reaching a really critical point in this deep dive. Why does Dawkins argue that Darwinism essentially stands alone? He makes this very bold claim. It's not just a theory, it's the only known theory capable, even in principle, of explaining adaptive complexity.
That's the core of his argument in the final chapters. He's focusing specifically on explaining the intricate functional design we see everywhere in life. The eye, the wing, the sonar things, made of many interlocking parts, all working together for a purpose that couldn't possibly have arisen by a single stroke of luck.
So other theories might explain something.
Exactly. Maybe neutral mutation theory can explain patterns of protein variation that aren't under strong selection. But only cumulative selection, that process of filtering chance variations over countless small steps, generation after generation, provides a satisfying, mechanistic explanation for how you get something as complex and well-adapted as an eye.
It's the only known process that can build that kind of improbable design.
That's his assertion. He argues that even if we lacked all the direct fossil and molecular evidence we have, we'd still be justified in preferring Darwinism, simply because it's the only explanation on the table that could potentially account for adaptive complexity. The others fail in principle.
Okay, let's look at those supposed rivals. What about Lamarckism?
Lamarckism is often brought up. It has two main components. The first is the principle of use and disuse. Parts of the body that get used a lot grow bigger or stronger, while parts that aren't used tend to wither.
And that part seems true, right? Muscles grow with exercise, calluses form with friction.
Yes. That aspect, phenotypic plasticity, we'd call it now, is observable within an individual's lifetime. We adapt physiologically. Exposure to sun darkens skin, altitude training increases red blood cells. These are real acquired characteristics.
But the second part of Lamarckism is the crucial one, the inheritance of these acquired characteristics.
Right. The idea that the blacksmith's son inherits his father's strong muscles, or the giraffe stretched its neck reaching for leaves and passed that slightly longer neck directly to its offspring.
And that part is just wrong.
Demonstrably false, based on everything we know about heredity. It's folk wisdom, perhaps, but it doesn't happen in reality. Traits acquired during life aren't encoded back into the sperm or eggs.
And Dawkins argues it's not just empirically false, but theoretically impossible given how development works.
Yes, based on our understanding of epigenesis development unfolding from a genetic recipe, not a blueprint. Genes provide the instructions to build a body. They aren't a scale, model, or a description of the finished product that can be easily edited by life experiences.
It's a cake analogy.
Exactly. You can't cut a slice out of a baked cake and have the recipe magically rewrite itself so the next cake automatically comes out with a slice missing. If genes were a blueprint, maybe you could imagine a mechanism for transcribing changes back. But with a recipe, there's no straightforward way for the outcome, the cake or the adult body, to modify the instructions, the recipe or the genes.
So theoretical impossibility based on development.
That's a major flaw. But even if acquired traits somehow could be inherited, Lamarckism still fails fundamentally to explain adaptive evolution.
How so?
Think about most acquired characteristics. They're often injuries, scars, wear and tear, diseases. If these were all indiscriminately inherited, generations would become progressively more decrepit, inheriting all the damage accumulated by their ancestors.
Not exactly a recipe for improvement.
Not at all. The few acquired traits that are beneficial, like thicker skin from friction or stronger muscles from use, only exist because the capacity to respond adaptively to the environment was itself built by prior Darwinian selection.
Ah, so the ability to get a useful callus is Darwinian, even if the callus itself isn't directly inherited.
Precisely. Lamarckism, at best, can only explain adaptive change if it rides on the back of Darwinism, relying on Darwinian selection to ensure that the acquired responses are advantageous in the first place. It can't be the primary engine of adaptive evolution.
Okay, what about another alternative?
Mutationism. Mutationism was popular for a while. Its proponents believed evolution was driven primarily by mutations themselves, with natural selection playing a minor or negligible role. They often thought organisms had some kind of built-in tendency to mutate in certain, perhaps advantageous directions.
So the direction came from mutation, not selection.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
But this relies on a misunderstanding of what random means in the context of mutation.
It needs clarifying, yeah. Mutations aren't random in every sense.
Correct. They aren't random in the sense that anything is possible. Developmental constraints limit what kinds of changes can occur. They aren't random in the sense that some genes mutate more often than others, or that certain agents like radiation can increase mutation rates.
But they are random in one crucial respect.
Yes. They are random with respect to adaptive advantage. There is absolutely no known biological mechanism by which mutations can know in advance what would be beneficial for the organism. They don't occur more often just because they would be helpful.
So there's no internal guidance system for mutation.
None that we know of. Without the filtering mechanism of natural selection, mutation alone is just a random walk through possibility space. It cannot reliably build complex adaptations. Mutationists who thought it could were essentially invoking an unexplained, almost mystical guidance.
This comes back to those questions.
Yeah.
Why don't bats have angel wings? Why don't dragons breathe fire?
Right. The answer isn't necessarily that selection actively rejected these things. It might simply be that mutation never offered these specific variations because they fall outside the realm of what's possible given the existing developmental pathways of bats or reptiles.
Selection can only work with the variation that mutation actually provides.
Exactly. But even if mutation could provide any variation imaginable, mutation alone, without selection, still couldn't direct evolution towards adaptive improvement.
Lastly, what about theories involving guided evolution or outright creationism?
These fall outside science in a way because they ultimately invoke supernatural intervention or an unexplained guiding force. Think about the eye evolving through, say, 1,000 incremental genetic steps. Natural selection explains this at a pathfinding process through a vast labyrinth of possibilities. At each of the 1,000 steps, maybe many mutations occur, but selection favors only the tiny subset that leads towards improved vision, guiding the lineage down a very specific adaptive pathway. The failures litter the wayside.
But guided evolution would assume.
It would have to assume either an instantaneous creation, which bypasses the problem of gradual building entirely, or some external intelligence or force actively directing the right mutations to occur at the right time, or somehow pointing the way through the labyrinth.
Which isn't a scientific explanation.
No, because it doesn't provide a naturalistic mechanism. It's essentially saying a miracle occurred, or an unknown force did it. It doesn't explain how adaptive complexity arises from simpler beginnings using known principles. It fails to provide a mechanism.
So pulling this all together, when you look closely at Lamarckism, mutationism, guided evolution,
They turn out not to be genuine rivals to Darwinism, at least not when it comes to explaining the central problem of adaptive complexity. They fail, in principle, Dawkins argues, to provide a mechanism that can generate the kind of organized, functional, improbable design that characterizes life. Only cumulative selection seems up to the task. Outro. So I've journeyed through the core arguments of the Blind Watchmaker. We've seen how this sheer, almost mind-boggling complexity of life, well, it isn't evidence for a conscious designer after all. Instead, it's a testament to the patient, relentless, cumulative power of natural selection operating over unimaginable timescales.
yeah, from that backward wired eye, which seems like a mistake, to the incredible precision of bat sonar.
And right down to the self-replicating molecules that started it all, and the spiraling arms races that drive increasing sophistication. Every detail seems to reveal this underlying logic. It's gradual, it's blind, but the processes are astonishingly creative.
And hopefully, you now have a better handle on why seemingly simple ideas like natural selection can be so incredibly profound, and how things that look like imperfections can actually be powerful clues to evolutionary history.
And why our everyday intuition about chance and design just doesn't scale up when you're talking about geological time.
We've seen the Red Queen effect running just to stay in place, and why nature's most impressive feats are usually the result of countless tiny steps, not massive leaps.
That cumulative power is key.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Dawkins argues that the apparent luck needed for life to originate on one planet becomes almost statistically inevitable when you consider the sheer number of planets in the universe.
Right, the odds change dramatically with more opportunities.
So it makes you wonder, what other miracles, what other phenomena that seem incredibly improbable to us now might simply be the understandable consequence of vast numbers, deep time, and underlying blind mechanisms that we just haven't fully deciphered yet?
That's a great question to ponder. Keep observing the world around you with these ideas in mind. Notice the apparent design everywhere in nature. But then challenge yourself. Think about the gradual steps, the historical constraints, the compromises, the arms races, the sheer depth of time that truly shaped it.
There's always more to unpack.
Always more to learn and appreciate in the wonders of the living world, seen through this lens.